It is Big Play Detroit. I am Chris Castellani. We are joined here by Austin Cisler, and plenty to talk about this week. A real smorgasbord is just kind of looking at the first three segments here. We're going to bounce around from Tigers to some Pistons offseason stuff to some Michigan State news. Kind of a disastrous week in terms of Michigan State athletics. We'll discuss all that. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we will start with the Tigers, who had a completely neutral week, a week where things didn't really get better and things didn't really get worse. They won a home series against the Minnesota Twins, a series they should have swept against a Twins team that stinks. But look, you win the series. That's what I've been saying. It would be hypocritical for me to come on here and not be complimentary of the fact that they've been stacking series on top of one another. They were, I think, 6-2, something like that in June to begin June. But what I said before this Guardians series started was this is the one that's going to tell us a lot. Because if you go to Cleveland, which is a divisional opponent, and it's a divisional opponent that for the better part of a decade has smacked you silly, I mean, sucked your soul out and crushed your dreams, and playoffs last year being the exception, obviously. If you win this series and you start doing some things that we haven't seen you do over the last calendar year, then people might start buying in again. And Detroit mercifully was saved on Sunday because of a rainout. So instead of losing that game in June, they will now lose that game in September. And they laid an egg in the first two games and ultimately would have lost the series regardless of whether or not they played on Sunday. They find themselves once again 13 games under 500, which I think is where they were after that Rays series when they went to Tampa and swept them. So I don't know. I mean, let me take this back. I do understand the Cleveland thing. It's very clear that Cleveland has Detroit's number. And when I say that, I think it's so easy to just kind of throw your hands up and be like, well, I guess there's nothing they can do. No, it's just the fact that Cleveland has a team that is the antithesis of Detroit. Their star players, and I know that Jose Ramirez unfortunately got injured, but their star players play like stars when it matters. They make contact. They are a tremendous defensive team. They have a wipeout bullpen with a lot of swing and miss. I would say their pitching in general has been wonderful. They have a deep farm system and a deep tradition of developing good young players. These are all things that Detroit is trying to do, and in some instances just flat out can't do. This defense isn't going to get any better, and that's kind of where I want to talk about this right now because look, I'm going to allow things to continue to play out. There's this weird thing that exists amongst Detroit fans where the second they fall below 500, the question is, who are they going to sell at the deadline? You have to give these things time, and we've given them plenty of time. But the report came out today. Detroit will wait probably till roughly around the All-Star break before they make a decision on Tarek Skubal. That's how it should be. Okay? Like, a lot of things can happen in this game. There's teams that don't decide whether or not they're going to sell until days before the deadline. I have no problem with that. What I do have a problem with is that regardless of how this goes, regardless of whether or not Detroit finds themselves back in contention and starts playing well again, because we've seen it in bits and pieces in the month of June, the thing that just keeps coming into my head, and I think we've seen it really in the latter stretch of last year, but especially this season, is that the makeup of this roster is remarkably flawed. It's flawed from an athleticism standpoint, which is that there's no athleticism. I mean, you look around this diamond, it's guys that are either playing out of position or guys like Riley Green who have, bodies that are about 20 years older than they should be. I mean, Riley Green is 26 years old. He can't run. He can't move. He can't steal bases. He plays a fine left field, but he's slow. His body's diminished. And for a guy at such a young age, that's ridiculous. Torque can't catch a pop-up. Colt Keith is out of position at third base. McGonigal, who I don't think is an elite defender by any means, is probably the best of them outside of the catchers just by default. In the outfield on any given night, you have Vierling, who's been a mess in center, Wenzel, who's not much in center, Carey, who is, boofing balls in right field. I mean, it's a joke. And when you play these teams that are contact teams that are forcing you to make not just spectacular plays, but sometimes just basic plays, you're not going to do it. That is, I think, the biggest flaw in what Scott Harris has tried to build over the last few years is they have just been under this belief of screw it, we'll find spots for you. We'll move Z-Mac around. We'll move Wenzel around. We'll move Colt Keith around. That's not how it works in this league. When I watch the way that Cleveland plays defense, J-Ram is a third baseman. Rocchio is a shortstop. He's a middle infielder. And these guys, they make every single play. And against a team like Cleveland or any good team that you play in this league, you got to take advantages of the opportunities when they're given. And every time Cleveland has a chance to make a play, they make it. Every time Detroit has an opportunity to hit with runners in scoring position, they don't do it. And, we saw that in that second game where they were given opportunities after, Skubal didn't have a particularly great outing. They were given opportunities to play their way back into it. And the lack of clutch gene that exists with Riley and Torque and some of these guys just shines through. And I know I focus on those guys. And while it is true that when they hit, this team wins, that's undeniably true. The fact is, there's so much pressure on these guys because the bottom half of your lineup is made up of nothings right now. And there's so much focus, understandably, on Jahmai Jones, who is currently batting. We've seen him bat third. We've seen him bat fifth, sixth, but he's batted in high leverage situations, currently batting under 140 with no power. He's not drawing walks. He's not making hard contact, contrary to what AJ said. And look, here's the thing. AJ had a quote talking about Jahmai on Sunday before the game got rained out that kind of went, I tweeted about it and sort of went viral on Tiger's Twitter, which is, he's still saying we believe in these guys. And the quote, and I'm paraphrasing here, was, we need Jahmai to do his job properly because that is how this roster is made up. In order for this roster to succeed, guys like Jahmai need to be successful. Reading into that, what I genuinely believe is that AJ thinks this idea of having 3 everyday players and then platooning everybody else is somehow an advantage. That over time, those percentages are going to play out. That over time, he's going to be able to outsmart another manager. Over time, he's going to be able to outthink other teams. And Carey's going to hit against righties. Jahmai is going to hit against lefties. And combined, you're going to have a super player that's going to put up a 900 OPS platooning collectively. We have a big enough sample size now where, you need these guys to do their jobs. They're not doing them. And I don't know how much longer we need to get into the season for you to have that realization that this isn't working. You have legitimately, and I don't know how many of these guys are qualified, but in terms of guys with X number of at-bats, a certain number of at-bats, I'll have to look. You legitimately have 4 or 5 of the worst offensive players in your sport, whether it's Jake Rogers or Wenzel Perez or Zach McKinstry or Matt Vierling, who has a negative WAR right now, or I think I said Z-Mac, or, even Colt Keith, who finally homered, but, for the better part of 2 months hadn't done anything, or Jahmai Jones. You're trying to platoon guys that aren't even hitting the players that they're supposed to be hitting in that platoon. It's not working. And, I understand every so often the offense will wake up. They had an 11-run outing against Minnesota a few days ago. That's fine. That's what this offense is. It's an offense that's good enough to hit bad Twins pitching. It's good enough to hit Steven Matz, who's been a ghost for about 6 years. It's good enough to hit Griffin Jacks, who until a year ago was a reliever for the Twins, now converted into a starter. But when it matters, when you're facing teams that have a familiarity with you, which Cleveland obviously does, they smoke you. And I'm probably coming across as a little bit more negative than people would expect because they won that first series this week. But I'm tired of it. Look, Cleveland deserves all the credit in the world for the way they play against Detroit and the way they have them figured out. They're not that freaking good, okay? This is not the 98 Yankees, and you play like it every single time you go there, or they come to Comerica. This team has now lost 6 games in a row to begin this season against Cleveland. I could be wrong. I think you play them 12 times, meaning if by some miracle you find your way back into contention, you're going to lose the tiebreaker by virtue of the fact that you dropped the first 6 games. If you win the next 6, you might not own the tiebreaker against Cleveland, which is exactly what cost you the division a year ago. You understand, for all the collapsing, for all the nonsense that went down in September a year ago, if they win one more game against Cleveland, they are hosting that playoff series. Right now, arguably, Cleveland's not even the worst offender. I mean, you got the White Sox that are in first place in that division, but I am so sick, and it's been this way for a decade now, where every time things start to seem like they're getting ahead, every time it seems like there's something of an uptick, they go to Cleveland and collapse. It's the inverse of what we saw in the 2010s when it was like, the last thing Cleveland wanted to see is Detroit. Well, now the last thing Detroit wants to see is Cleveland. And if you want to say it's a mental block, if you want to say it's a roster problem, if you want to say it's a fundamental flaw with the team or the lack of athleticism, the answer is yes. It's all the above. But at the end of the day, I'm a little bit sick of hearing about why it's happening. Fix it. Okay, this is years of this, and you're on a verge right now where you have to keep stacking up series on top of each other. That's what I said. You haven't been doing, you didn't do that this weekend, and you're back to 13 games under 500. And now you go to Houston, which is no easy place to play, and then you come back home to play a first place team in Chicago. Like, for as well as they played in the early part of June, we cannot forget how far behind the 8 ball this team found themselves in. So a frustrating weekend. Austin, I am going to let you talk here at some point, but we are going to get to we're going to get to segment number 2 here in just a second. I want to discuss some news around the NBA, talking about the Detroit Pistons and some potential offseason moves for them. We'll be back here in just a second. This won't be the longest segment in the world. I want to talk about the Pistons. Obviously, the NBA season now officially over. Congrats to the New York Knicks, NBA champions for the first time in 53 years. Further proving that the regular season in the NBA is one of the most meaningless things in the world, because Detroit boat raced New York every time they played them during the regular season, which turned out to be fugazi. I think when you look at the playoffs, New York proved themselves to be the hottest, but also most consistent and definitely clutchest team. I think that one of the most iconic moments in the history of New York sports occurred this week, both with Game 4, that unbelievable comeback with the Anunoby tip-in, and of course Game 5 with the comeback to seal the deal against the Spurs. But we're not going to talk about the Knicks. We're going to talk about the Pistons, because ever since the Pistons lost Game 7 to Cleveland, and I would argue even before that, there have been whispers about what needs to happen to this organization. And I'm going to be hammering this. Detroit had a wonderful season this year in which they won 60 games, only the third time in this organization's history in which they've done that. 1 seed in the East, made it to the second round, lost Game 7 at home, got destroyed at home by Cleveland. I am telling you right now, and I've said this on multiple shows, if Detroit tries to run this back with the exact same roster, it's not going to yield the same results. They are a fine team. They're a well put together team with a superstar player in Cade Cunningham. It felt like regular season wise, every break they could have caught, they caught this year. Even when things went sideways, like Cade going out with a collapsed lung, they just found ways to continue to win. And I think by the time they got to the postseason and you saw how they matched up with some of these teams, the flaws in the roster started to show themselves. And the biggest one being, there needs to be a legitimate shooter, creator, scorer after Cade Cunningham to complement him. I feel like every team has 1 or 2 of those guys. You know, obviously Brunson has multiple options there in New York, Wemby multiple options in San Antonio. Well, Cade needs at least one more option. And I was going to make this a segment kind of comparing and contrasting the different options that Detroit has available. But I'm not going to do that, because to me, one option is so much better and like obvious than the others. I've seen some crazy names thrown out there. I've seen Austin Reeves. I've seen Kobe White. Obviously, you could re-sign Tobias Harris, which I don't think would move the needle that much. I've seen Kyrie Irving's name thrown out there, and Kyrie looked wonderful, all-time great point guard. And we learned this the hard way with Jaden Ivey. You know, at his position, being similar to Cade's, I don't know if they would be able to complement each other on the same floor at the same time. It's not a knock on each individual player, but we've learned over the last few years, both positively and negatively, you know, in the case of Troy Weaver, how important roster construction is. I don't know if that would work. You know, this is something that annoys me with Detroit sports sometimes, is that there's a very obvious option and fans clamor for it, and often the fans are right. And yet the organization overthinks it or isn't willing to dish out the money or trade the draft picks, what have you, and they end up with the lesser option. I think this year, and we'll see what Petzing does, but kind of felt like Mike. I always get him confused. The coach Mike McDaniel was the perfect option for OC. Lions didn't think he was a fit, but this is more comparable to me to the shortstop situation from 5 years ago. For the record, the guy I want is Trey Murphy. And there's so many things about this that make sense. You get a scorer, you get a legit shooter. I also think, similar to the Lions, the Pistons care greatly about their culture and bringing in guys that fit that culture. And that includes being a really good defender. Murphy provides that. And when you take a deeper look into it, there is the New Orleans connection. Obviously, Langdon coming from there. New Orleans isn't going anywhere. I think it would be a perfect option for him to kind of get out. It's something of a risk, I guess. But I think, as we've learned over the last few years, especially when you look at how the Knicks did it, the Knicks took a lot of risks. I mean, there's a full YouTube compilations of people talking about how bad of a signing Jalen Brunson is. Now the guy's the king of New York. You know, you're not bringing in a guy to be a franchise player. You're bringing him on to be a second option. I think in terms of floor spacing, it provides you with an elite option. I think culturally it fits fantastically. And I just think when you look at the connection there from New Orleans with him and Trajan Langdon, this is very similar to me to how I felt about the Tigers 5 years ago when Carlos Correa was a free agent. where you had all these shortstops that were available. And I was clamoring before the 21 season was even at the All-Star break, I was talking about, like, go get Correa. It makes sense. Team him back up with AJ, free agent. He can be the guy here. And you know what? I know Javi's had some moments. I'm still mad they didn't sign him. They still should have freaking signed him. And I think the organization would have looked a lot different and been in a lot better shape had they have done that. The Pistons, well, I don't think are capable with their current roster of achieving the success that they had a year ago. They've got the hard part down. They have a superstar. They have, by all means, the right coach and GM in place. Now you have to be aggressive and make a move. Look, the fact is, in 2004, there were people that were unsure about the Rasheed Wallace trade. I think that not Pistons fans, Detroit fans as a whole are very tired of the consistent reliance by these teams, or the consistent assurance from these teams that what they have is going to be good enough. We saw it with the Lions last year. We saw it with the Tigers last year. We saw it with the Pistons this year. At some point, you're going to have to realize that the pieces you have, well, fine, well, competent, well, good, may not be good enough. And I think going out and getting a piece like Murphy just makes too much sense. And it might cost him a bit. I understand it, but I don't know of anyone right now who is complaining about the money that the Knicks gave Brunson, or any one of the guys that they added to that team in recent history. So, all right, we'll be back. Segment number 3. And Austin, I'll bring you on. We are going to talk some Michigan State stuff, kind of a little bit off the beaten path of what I usually talk about, but I feel like it is rather important news. We'll be right back. All right, we're back. Segment number 3. And Austin, I'm going to include you in on this one. So one thing I didn't talk about a few weeks ago was that it was announced that Michigan State president Kevin Guskowitz was leaving the program and taking a job at Clemson for, by what I read, a lesser paying job at the University of Clemson. I did not discuss this. I didn't talk about it. When it comes to the world of academia, or really the world of university goings on, I don't really like to bring that to the forefront, generally because I think I talk about sports, and if it affects the sports programs, sure. But it was obviously news, and it was obviously something that people were disappointed in. But okay, as one guy decided to leave, he hadn't been there for very long. It was surprising, but we'll see what happens. Now, and by the time this is up, maybe something will have changed, but as of the time of this recording, Jay Batt, Michigan State athletic director, who's only been there for about a year plus, currently in line to become the new athletic director at the University of Kentucky. Michigan State now in danger of losing their president and their athletic director in the same month. This segment, and it's why I'm glad I have you on here, Austin, this segment is not meant to be a dunking on the University of Michigan State, or Michigan State University. I'm sorry, I didn't get that right. It's more so an acknowledgement of what's going on. Because, look, does any president AD combo anywhere really scare me? No, I mean, I care about the results in the field and, like, the coaches and the players. At the same time, I think Michigan State had very much been a rudderless ship for several years. That was reflected in how they went about some of their hires. That was reflected in the handling of those hires. It felt like the Jonathan Smith thing was kind of messed up from the beginning, and then Haller kind of went behind people's backs, and then all of a sudden Haller's leaving. It felt like for the first time in a while, there was actual synergy. And not only that, but there were actual steps being taken, both by this president and by the athletic director. Jay Batt, look, say what you will, but he didn't mess around. Fired Jonathan Smith like the second that season ended, and very clearly had made the decision to do so well before that season was over, because Pat Fitzgerald was hired like the next day. All right. Generally speaking, the approval rating for that hire, great. They have talked about NIL. They've made it very clear that they want to continue to push forward and move forward football into this sort of new age. They've talked about stadium renovations. They've talked about name, image, likeness, how they're going to pay their players. I would say in the 1 year that he's been there, Jay Batt did quite a bit for Michigan State, came highly recommended coming out of Georgia Tech. And is all of that undone now? Not necessarily, but it's a crushing blow. And it's undeniable at this point because, and I want to be very delicate with how I choose my words here, because I don't want to shed light on stuff that's heinous and disgusting. I really want to focus more on sports. But I will say about a decade ago, the horrific, story of Larry Nassar and the gymnastics team came out, and it was terrible. And at the time, many people criticized Michigan State's leadership and Michigan State's handling of that situation. Now, that situation, far, far more important, far worse than anything that's going to go on a football field in terms of wins and losses. I'm not trying to downplay the severity of what that was. That was almost a decade ago. And the fact that we are almost 10 years removed from that, and we still have people talking about the ineffectiveness of the board of trustees, people being on that board that shouldn't be there, the dysfunction within the athletic department, and now you've reached a point where you have lost two guys that had very high approval ratings within your university. I think it's a really crushing blow, and it's something that I think is a little bit more important. Like, it's why I'm bringing it to the show, because I do think it's important. We are in an age now where universities, especially as it pertains to athletics, need to all be on the same page. Like, I understand that when we talk about Indiana sports and we talk about Cignetti and the success that he's had, and Cignetti's evaluations and all that stuff has been masterful, right? You also had Indiana hiring the right guy. You also had Indiana finally, the Mark Cuban money starting to pump some money into that football program. Hell, let's look at a program in your own state. Michigan basketball was a mess under Juwan. Juwan leaves. They hire the right guy. They promise him resources. They provide him with those resources. People are finally giving money to the program, the opportunity for them to pay players. He hits home run after home run in the portal. He goes out and gets Trey McKinney, who's a 5-star McDonald's All-American. That's one more McDonald's All-American than John Beilein ever got. And in year 2, he's a national champion. Yes, does Dusty deserve the utmost credit for that? Sure. But so do the people that hired Dusty and believed in Dusty. And this is coming from a guy who has begged for Michigan to fire Ward Manuel for months, in arguably years. Like, the fact that you have a guy who is a known dysfunctional athletic director that I'm on here like almost defending, I think is a testament to what's going wrong at Michigan State. And this is just a question I want to throw to you, Austin, because I feel like I've covered it, but just as a fan, do you find yourself demoralized? Do you feel like this is a big story? Do you think that I'm making a much bigger deal out of this than needs to be made?
Well, it's absolutely a crushing blow. This isn't necessarily my personal area of expertise. I mean, college sports have moved into this age that is so different from what, we grew up with, and just trying to keep up with it is a lot. But like you said, it seemed like there was some synergy starting to happen, a lot of alignment with some of the pieces. But like Guskowitz leaving for a lower paying job, and now it looks like J-Bat is going to be leaving for Kentucky, which Kentucky, historically, great basketball program. But, we live in this era where football rules all, right? And it pretty much probably always will. In Michigan State, even though they've had a lot of downs recently, historically, they've always been a much better football program than Kentucky. And so it's just such a surprising thing to see. I've seen a lot of Michigan State fans online. They're all pointing their fingers at the board of trustees. Apparently, there's a lot of infighting, abusing their own power and their positions, leaking information that shouldn't be leaked. I don't know a lot of the specifics about that. It's very disappointing for the university, especially when there have been so many issues. You brought up, the Nassar thing, although that was a long time ago. Mel Tucker's situation. There's just been so many issues. And a lot of fans were really excited about J-Bat, and it just felt like the pieces and the culture was starting to come together. We're not going to know totally how this affects, the program, the basketball program, the football program, and even like Michigan State hockey, right? Michigan State hockey, one of the best in the entire sport. We're not going to know for years down the line. And I will say, J-Bat is not officially with Kentucky yet, but it looks like that's going to happen. If I had to put a percentage on it, I'd probably say like 75, 80% likelihood that he goes there. But, what we really care about here is how is that going to affect the basketball program and how is that going to affect the football program. luckily at Michigan State, we've been blessed with Tom Izzo for 3 decades now. And it's, talk about stability. And he's built such a culture here that, I think he's absolutely going to be heavily involved in figuring out who his replacement is one day. And so many great names have come through here. Guys like Mateen Cleaves, Denzel Valentine, Cassius Winston, of course, Magic Johnson. So, they're not going to let this program fall apart ever. But then you look on the football side of things. We've had one good year since Brian Lewerke was here. We had the 11-2 season under Mel Tucker. And a lot of people, they'll say it was pretty much Kenneth Walker carrying the team. There were some other pretty good pieces on that team, like Jaden Reed. Peyton Thorne had a pretty solid year that year. But other than that, Michigan State has not been a good football program for about 10 years, and it's very frustrating to see. And, like I said, I don't really know how all this is going to affect the football program. It could affect Pat Fitzgerald and his interest here and, what may happen a few years down the line. But we saw him in the booth with Jason and Andy at a Tigers game recently. And he was very reassuring and reiterating, his commitment to Michigan State. And it seems like things are going really well. So even if J-Bat leaves, I think we will have Pat for at least this upcoming season, hopefully, a handful more. I was very high on him when he was hired. Guys like Jonathan Smith and Mel Tucker, I was never totally sold on them because Mel Tucker always seemed a bit inauthentic, more flash over substance. And at the time, that's what programs were looking for, guys to bring in recruits. Jonathan Smith, they went with a guy who's going to be very uncontroversial, and that wound up killing them. It just did not seem like he had the drive to win that, some other guys out there did. Pat Fitzgerald looks like a football guy through and through. And so I think the football program is finally headed in the right direction. But once fans are finally starting to get invested in what the football program is doing, and then all of a sudden president's gone, AD looks like he's headed out the door, it has all of us scratching our heads wondering what the heck is going on here. So hopefully they find a way to keep J-Bat around. If they don't, hopefully they can find a good replacement for him. I think things will still be headed in the right direction, but they have to solve these issues that are going on with the Board of Trustees, because right now their approval rating is in the trash right now. And yeah.
Yeah. And look, when it comes to the Board of Trustees stuff, a lot of that is politics in a world that I'm not super well versed in. I mean, I think you did about as good a job. I think you did about as good a job as anyone of kind of just explaining what the where the controversies have been. I guess just, and this is where I'm going to defend Michigan State a little bit. Michigan State University is a major big time university. I know that there is the shadow that looms large of Michigan being in the same state. I understand that, but like you never hear me bring up like the little brother narrative or any of that nonsense. Like, it's a huge school. Like, if I had a child who's like, I'm going to Michigan State, I'd be like, dude, that's amazing. Like, you're getting into a huge school. The problem is that Michigan State does not always operate like they're a major legitimate university. And I think that when you've looked at the coaches who've had great success at MSU, D'Antonio, Izzo, obviously, these guys came in and said, no, this is where we want people to be. It really doesn't matter what other universities are in the state. We're going to operate the way that every other great university or every other great program operates. And I think that there's just this unfortunate juxtaposition where you have this major university with a huge fan base and an amazing campus and a huge alumni base that keeps having this revolving door of presidents and athletic directors. It just doesn't fit in line with what a program of Michigan State's caliber, what a university of Michigan State's caliber should be. We'll be back here in segment number 4. Austin, you're going to be running point as we talk a little bit of Justin Verlander news. Verlander, I think, is going to be back in the major league on the major league roster here at some point, though I don't know. We'll see. We'll talk about that in just a second. All right, segment number 4. It is time for our I'll Say This segment. I'm going to set this one up for you, Austin, because I earlier this week, after what was a fine first outing in AAA. Justin Verlander roughed up in AAA as a member of the Mud Hens in another rehab start. I think I saw somewhere that there were 4 major league teams, including one game against the Tigers, I remember in 2018, in which Justin Verlander had given up 4 home runs to them in the same game. Well, you can add whoever they were playing. I can't even remember whoever they were playing in AAA last week on that, because Verlander, I think, goes 5 innings, gives up 4 home runs, and people have already, kind of looked at this rotation and where things are and what things are going to look like if and when he does come back. So that's where I'm going to, turn it over to you here for the I'll Say This segment. What do you got on Justin Verlander?
I'll say this: Justin Verlander should become the Detroit Tigers' Swiss Army knife. So I saw Ben Bosher put out a tweet kind of putting into perspective where the Tigers' rotation is right now. And he said essentially that he thinks that Justin Verlander should kind of do the thing that we saw Clayton Kershaw do with the Dodgers towards the end of his career. And I thought that was a really smart point. Personally, the kid in me who's super nostalgic to see Justin Verlander back, I want to see him back in the rotation. I want to see him taking no hitters into the 6th inning. But we have to be realistic about, where he's at in his career. He's the oldest player in baseball. And he had a pretty good season last year with the Giants, but this is no longer prime Justin Verlander. And as you pointed out, he's been up and down with his rehab starts so far, but he is going to come back at some point. Of course, we did just lose Jack Flaherty, but that doesn't necessarily open up a rotation spot for Justin Verlander, because when you look at it, Skubal's back, you have Valdez, and Valdez has not had the best season by his standards, but they paid him a lot of money. He's 32 or so, and he's, perennial all-star. So he's got a rotation spot guaranteed. Then you have guys like Mize, who just came, or he's about to come back. I think his first start back was delayed. That was supposed to be today. Mm-hmm. And then you have Montero and Melton. Melton has been really good so far. I really like him. You really like him. He showed what he can do in the postseason last year. Montero is one of those guys that it seems like every time things are going terribly and no one is playing well, all of a sudden Montero will put the team on his back and just have some great outing. So, it's nice to have that. And he has, I believe, the 3rd best whip on the team. And then with Mize, he was an all-star last year. People forget that. And, in his limited amount of outings that he's had this year, he's pitched very well. He has a higher WAR right now than he did all of last season. So who would you take out of that rotation to give this, 40-year-old plus player some starts? Of course, like I said, I really want to see Justin Verlander get some starts, and that will absolutely happen. Their guys will continue to go down, get injured, whether that's long-term or even just, they need to start pushed back. But I don't think you can take any of those guys out of the rotation with the way that they're pitching right now, or the way that we know they can pitch. So I think when Verlander comes back, I think you got to start him off in the pen. I think you got to see, him throw a few innings at a time. And, rather than being this back end starter, the 5th guy out of 5 in the rotation, I feel like it would be a much more interesting story and way more unique, and potentially give him a much more critical role on this team if he's a guy that is a spot starter when we need him. Can eat up a bunch of innings if a pitcher goes out early, whether that's due to bad performance, injury, whatever, or is even, throwing some potentially high leverage innings. A lot of our relief pitchers have really struggled so far this year. And that includes Kenley Jansen, who we were hoping to rely on. Of course, we just got him back as well. But I think that would be a really interesting route for Justin Verlander for this season. Of course, hopefully we will be getting Jackson Joe back again later in the season as well. So that's another starter that, a lot of people are really high on. So there's just a lot of starters that we all really like, and only so many spots in the rotation. So I kind of liked that idea of, using Justin Verlander where he's best suited.
It shows how sideways things have gone this season, because if you would have had this suggestion before the season started, I said no way. Like, Verlander's here to pitch, he's here to start. This is a team that's projected to win the division. It's a team that's projected to be in first place, maybe even make a run to the World Series. Like, I want Verlander taking the ball every fifth day. But whether it's injuries, Verlander's own personal performance, or kind of uncertainty surrounding him, or just the ineffectiveness of certain guys on the staff, I wouldn't mind this. I wouldn't. I think, one, I don't want Verlander to come back, start every fifth day, and just get destroyed. I think that would be a really sad way for him to potentially go out as a Tiger. But secondly, I'm really this is more to do with the bullpen than it does with Verlander, and the fact that who you taking out, right? I'm just, especially when I watch Cleveland's bullpen against us, man, I'm so sick of these soft tossing, pitch for contact guys in this bullpen, and even some of them, even the more effective ones, like, there's a lot of signs of regression, like Finnegan. Holton has just been a mess this season. Kenley's been a disaster when he's pitched. Herter was good, gets injured. Like, Hannafy was here for a minute, and he's tossing that clunky sinker and not striking anybody out. Like, Verlander, at the very least, in a 1, 2, maybe even 3 inning sample size where he can air out that fastball a little bit, you have some potential for swing and miss. Here's what I'll say, and I'll meet you halfway. I think when Verlander comes back, I think he's getting the ball every fifth day, and I think they'll do 6-man rotation for the time being. If, and it's a big if they get to a point where they are back within relative contention or playing for something, that's when I think they would consider making him long relief spot starter guy. Because at that point, you can't really ride with a 6-man rotation. Like, I feel like you're playing with fire a little bit. And if it's near deadline time, you could look at it and say, hey, we don't need to make any moves to upgrade this bullpen, because we can just move one of our starters to the pen, potentially even 2, depending on what happens with Flaherty, and be able to get reps in that way and potentially get swing and miss. And I think this shows how much Verlander has changed, because a decade ago, I think there's no way we're having this conversation. I think he'd be willing to do it. I think he'd be excited for it. We kind of knew what this was, and I think the big thing, and he talked about it coming into the season, is unfinished business. I think he wants to do whatever is going to help the team. And I think if that is potentially pitching out of the bullpen, have at it. Yeah, we'll see. It would be worth a shot. I think at this point he's still getting reps every fifth day, but it's definitely something to pay attention to. We'll be right back. We have one more Tigers segment, and then we're going to wrap it up with a little bit of World Cup talk in the gambling segment. But we'll be right back. This is Big Play Detroit. Big Play Detroit, Chris Castellani, Austin Cisler. Time for Fact or Fiction. Austin, you came up with this one. What do you got today for Fact or Fiction?
Fact or Fiction, Dylan Dingler should start getting more reps at first base to preserve his longevity.
Okay, so this is something that I want to give you. You gave credit to Ben Bosher last segment. I want to give credit to Jed, who I saw on Tigers Twitter tweeted this out. And this is why Twitter and social media in general is it's not the best place, because my instant reaction was no chance. No, he's too valuable at catcher. I want him to keep playing catcher. I feel like that's where he's at his best. And despite the fact that his numbers for a catcher especially are gaudy from an offensive standpoint, the idea of shaking that up kind of scares me. That said, and this team just annoys the heck out of me, because I feel like every time they plug up one hole, 3 more pop up. But one, Dingler could do it. Okay, what people forget is not only was Dingler a catcher at Ohio State, Dingler played the outfield. Like, he played center field. This is an elite catching athlete. Like, this is not one of these guys that's just going to, be stumbling around the bases. Like, this is a rare catching specimen in that sense. He can provide versatility. The second thing is even if he was playing first base right now, which first base production offensively is much different than how you view catching offensive production, he's still better than Torkelson. And like, I don't want to make this into a bully Spencer Torkelson segment, but the fact is, when you look at the guys who played first base for this team, really over the last few years, whether it's Torque or Colt Keith, or I think they gave Glaber some reps at first, or going back a few years, Mark Canna. Like, this has not been a productive offensive position, and it is one of the most valuable offensive positions from a productivity standpoint. Like, good teams have good, consistent hitting first baseman. Like, you want a prime example? We had Miguel Cabrera there for a decade plus. Like, this was not, an accidental, it's not an accidental thing. I mean, I think I'm sure there's exceptions, but generally speaking, that's where you put your power bats, or at first base. I'm still going to go fiction on this for the time being. But I feel like the older a player gets, and Dingler got kind of a late start in his career, didn't get called up till his mid-20s, I think currently kind of in his late 20s right now. As this goes deeper, I'm not completely against it, but not necessarily this season. I've been open about the fact that I think at some point here, you're going to have to make a decision about what the future looks like with Spencer Torkelson. And if you think that the best case scenario is, okay, let's give Ding some reps at first base, go ahead and do it. The last point, though, and I talked about it when I talked about the defense earlier, I understand the importance of versatility, but I'm a little bit sick of the chess pieces just constantly being moved around the board. I really don't think there's anything wrong with just having a catcher that plays catcher, and not just plays catcher, plays it at a Gold Glove, not caliber, a Gold Glove winning level, And of course, if there's a day where Ding isn't available, they've had him DH several times when Jake has been catching. If you want to play him at first, try him there. Okay, I have no problem with it. What I do have a problem with is the possibility of first base reps taking away from the value that he provides at that catcher position. So it's a good safety net to have, because Ding has put himself in a point where you're not taking him out of this lineup. And if that means DHing, great. If that means potentially playing first, sure. I think when you look at the makeup of the roster right now, especially with how defensively deficient they are, I want Dingler getting as many reps at catcher as possible, because not only is he elite there, but it is far and away the most valuable defensive position. But interesting. It's an interesting thought, though, and it wouldn't be surprising to me if, similar to Buster Posey, they made a move like that down somewhere further on in his career once he gets into his 30s to kind of preserve his longevity. All right, we'll be back. I got a little gambling stuff to talk about, little World Cup stuff, and then we will give our social media plugs and get out of here. The biggest stage in world soccer is here, and every goal changes everything. And now, FanDuel is giving you a reason to root for every single one. Introducing Every Goal Pays. Bet on a match and get bonus bets for every goal scored in that match. That's right. More goals means more bonus bets, and all you have to do is turn on your token. From the opening whistle to the final kick, let there be goals on FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/BigPlay to get started now. 21 plus, select states for Kansas in affiliation with Kansas Star Casino. 18 plus, DC, Kentucky, Wyoming. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. 1-800-MY-RESET. Call 1-888-789-7777. Visit ccpg.org/chat. For Connecticut, visit mdgamblinghelp.org. For Maryland, visit gamblinghelplinema.org. Call 800-327-5050. For Massachusetts, call 1-877-8-HOPE-NEW YORK. Text HOPE NY New York. Call 1-877-770-7867 for Louisiana. All right, final segment. Big Play Detroit. We want to talk about a little bit of World Cup stuff. And there was a time, and it was probably 2010 was probably the peak of it, where I actually got really into the World Cup. And it's a great event. I'm not even one of those people who's like, oh, soccer sucks. Like, so the thing is, the reason people like soccer is it's just a big party. Like, it's the biggest celebration. Like, the game itself is almost secondary. There's a great movie called Green Street Hooligans. And I'm not saying it's based on a true story, but I know these things exist, that is about a group of soccer fans who root for a team, but the game isn't important. What's important is that they all get together and fight opposing fans of the other team after every single game. Like, this is, I'm not saying that's fun necessarily, but like, that's the passion that people have for soccer, and that's the passion that people have for these teams. And I've tried to wonder, like, why is it that I haven't been able to get more into it since like 2010? And the biggest reason is the U.S. just isn't that great at soccer. And I mean, that's the thing we love, and I don't want to get political here, but the thing we love about America is that we kind of love being the best at stuff. Like, we love football because American football, because we view it as a very American thing, right? Like, we didn't appreciate Michael Phelps for all the bronze medals he won. We appreciated him because the guy went out and won gold at every single Olympic Games, right? We care about certain sports every 4 years in the Olympics that we normally wouldn't care about because we see Americans do amazing things. Hockey's another prime example. Do we like hockey in America? Absolutely, right? But I've never seen hockey be more popular than it was when Jack Hughes got that golden goal in the Olympics this season to knock off Canada. Gold medal match, right? And at least America was a power in hockey. They might not have been the power until this most recent Olympics, but like when you look at the United States and how they fared in the World Cup, dude, like, I'm sorry, and I'm not trying to be disparaging, but like, in what universe is like Uruguay kicking our asses? Like, I just feel like this stuff just shouldn't happen. And I understand soccer is not like prime thing in America, but I really think that's the one thing that's hurt the sport's popularity. So screw it. I don't think there will ever be odds like this for any American team ever. The U.S., after winning 4-1 against Paraguay, great win. I mean, great job. I saw Alexi Lawless said it was maybe the best first half he's ever seen in group play by the Americans. Keep in mind, they won their group in 2010 when they had the Landon Donovan game winner against Algeria. At some point, I don't know if it's going to be this run. At some point, the U.S. is going to have a moment in soccer. And it would either be in the Olympics or it would be in the World Cup. They've done it with women's soccer. Credit to the women. They've won gold medals. They've won the World Cup. I would say in terms of popularity, and I'm sure somebody will come in with the numbers and who's watching, but it feels like there's more momentum with women's soccer than there is with men's. So maybe that's what needs to change. Plus 5,000, which I thought was a misprint, but I went on FanDuel, look, plus 5,000 for the United States to win the World Cup. And that is after their 4-1 win. Outside of U.S. needs a moment in soccer, my only justification for this is the fact that, like, sometimes you just get a bad draw with the group you have. That's not the case with where the U.S. is at in group play. This like they didn't draw a Germany or a Brazil or a France. Like, I think that it's not just a group that they can get out of. It's a group that they could potentially win. And if that's the case, then it becomes single elimination. And who the hell knows? Generally speaking, from the few soccer people I've talked to, it seems like there's a little bit more momentum for this version of U.S. soccer in the World Cup than there has been in the past. Could it be Fugazi? We'll see. But hey, if you're a Patriot, if you're an American, you get double whammy. You get to see them win the World Cup, and you make a heck of a lot of money potentially at plus 5,000 on the FanDuel Sportsbook. Make sure to use FanDuel. All right, that'll do it. Another clean show. You can follow me on Twitter at Castellani2014. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Big Play Detroit. Chris Castle 95 on Instagram, at Chris Castellani on TikTok. We continue to grow there. And if you want to keep getting updates every single day and go back and watch all the Tiger videos we do, CastellaniContent.com has an archive of all the content that Austin and I have created. That includes every Tiger video from the last few years. That includes every Michigan basketball, football video from the last few years, and, of course, Lions videos. Lions we didn't get to this week. Not really much to talk about, but as we get deeper into the summer, I'm sure there will be way more to discuss, and we will check off all those boxes when the time is right. Austin, let's get your plugs in, then let's get out of here.
You can follow me on X at Austin Cisler. You can follow me on Instagram at Austin Cisler _20. I've got link trees in both bios with things like a YouTube channel of my own, as well as a portfolio where I archive some of the stuff that Chris and I do that doesn't necessarily make it up onto his channel, as well as some of the stuff that I do independently. And if you have any interest in promoting something on our show or sponsoring our show, Big Play Detroit, feel free to reach out to either Chris or myself on social media.
Yes, thank you for adding that once again. And that'll do it for today's show. Appreciate all the continued support as we try to grow this brand and expand beyond just, baseball stuff and the stuff that maybe you see me talk about on Twitter. We're doing the best we can. We'll talk to y'all again real soon. Have a great rest of your week. Peace and happiness.